Okay. Everyone, thank you for joining today. My name is Ryan Mulvey, and I am the president of the American Society of Access Professionals, and I'm very honored to welcome you all to this very special webinar on a very special topic. I won't speak too long because I'd like to get to our master of ceremonies, our moderator, Nate Jones. But before that, I do want to make a few quick comments. So first, some technical housekeeping. On the GoToWebinar control panel that you have, you will see that there is a handout section. There are 4 handouts there that contain both the PowerPoint presentations that you're going to see today, as well as some informational material from our speakers, from Rob and from Oksana. They can speak more as to what has been made available for your download and perusal at a later point. You'll also see the chat function. If you have questions that you'd like posed to the panelists after they've made their opening comments and initial conversation with each other, please post them in there. We have one of our board members, Martha Murphy, who has volunteered to help with reading the questions out to Nate, who can then assign them to the panelists. If anything else, if you have any technical questions or difficulties, feel free to drop them in that chat as well, and our executive director, Claire Shanley, can help address them. As just a little bit of background about ASAP, the American Society of Access Professionals is a nonprofit organization. I'm sure many of those who are here with us today are members. It was founded in 1980, and it's really an organization that is committed to fostering interest in and education about the Federal Freedom of Information Act, the Privacy Act, and other public access laws, and creating a place where the requester community and the Federal Information Officer community can really come together and to celebrate FOIA. Today's event is very special because we're taking a look outside of the federal FOIA and open access in the United States to what's happening in Ukraine. But I'll leave more of that to be introduced by Nate Jones, who's our moderator today. Nate is FOIA Director at the Washington Post. He works with the WAPO reporters to help with all stages of the FOIA process, and he speaks on FOIA. We've been honored to have him join the ASAP faculty for a number of events. If I'm not mistaken, you're a past director, member of the board of directors of ASAP as well. You've served, Nate has served on the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee, and he has his JD from the University of the District of Columbia. And before WAPO, Nate was at the National Security Archive. And with that, Nate, take it away.
Sure, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and welcome everyone. Welcome to Rob, welcome to Oksana. So I think before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I think the reason Ryan invited me to host this is because I talked his ear off about the archival research I did in Ukraine, and actually the Security Services Archives of Ukraine in 2017. So I just going to give a couple of sentences to kind of show we have with us today the foremost experts of American open government, and I thought I knew FOIA pretty well and U.S. Archives pretty well. But then when I researched in Ukraine, it was cool to see a whole nother world. So I think that's basically what we want to talk about today. But I just want to say, first of all, in the United States, to say, oh, I want to go to the CIA's archive, well, that doesn't exist. You won't have access. But in 2017, under these access laws that Oksana and Rob are going to talk about today, they essentially said, welcome, welcome, come. And we went through the security. We saw where the headquarters were. We went to the archive in the bottom of the building. The archivists there were extremely helpful. And there was this document that had about a secret speech by the head of the KGB in 1983, warning of potential nuclear war at the West. And it was in people's memoirs, and people had heard about it, but they had never seen the document. But in Ukraine, because it had separated from the Soviet Union, they had taken the position that all or almost all previously Soviet documents were essentially de facto open. So for a historian to be able to just think that records from 1983, intelligence records, you could have access to, it was like a kid in the candy shop. So with the help of the archivist, I was able to see, didn't find, and was able to see this key document, many more. They're on the website of the National Security Archive, and it was an incredible time working with open advocates, in open access advocates in Ukraine. So I think that might be why I'm here today, because I'm a huge booster of, I believe, the great work that Ukraine has done to provide access to records. I'm talking about historic records, but we're going to talk about all types today. So with further ado, I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues. Dr. Oksana Nesterenko is a legal scholar and public policy analyst. She is an associate professor of law at the National University of Kyiv-Molina. She's the executive director of the CSO Anti-Corruption Research and Education Center. And she is no stranger to Washington, D.C. She's a fellow at GW Iris's program and a Fulbright Kennan Institute research scholar. And the Wilson Center, where the Kennan Center is, paid for me to research in Ukraine. So there's a nexus there. And I hope she will talk about this today. She was actively involved in drafting the law on access to public information. So I believe that's the Ukrainian equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act that I believe was drafted in 2012. We're in for a treat. Rob O'Donovan is the Vice President for Programs at the Eurasia Foundation. He oversees the Foundation's civic engagement and government practice area, which includes the Foundation's flagship anti-corruption e-governance program in Ukraine. Rob began as his international development career in 1996 as a Peace Corps volunteer teaching English in Kazakhstan. He also was based in Tbilisi, Georgia, from 2001 to 2006, which you might remember was also tough times. I also went on my honeymoon in Tbilisi, so another nexus. And he's going to talk about the Eurasia Foundation programs in Ukraine. So I believe Oksana is going to begin. And without that, I will turn it over to you. And people watching at home, please do think of questions and send them in as Ryan instructed earlier. Thank you very much, guys. Looking forward to
it. Hello, everyone. How it sound?
Perfect.
Good. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on this important topic today. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be here as a speaker. My name Oksana Nesterenko. So right now I'm also running like anti-corruption research and education center that I also a little bit tell about this. And before I start with my presentation about the public information access in Ukraine, that was a catalyst for transparency, I would like do brief overview of Ukraine. Can we move? I'm not sure if I can control the presentation. Can we move next slide? Yeah, thank you. Oh, no, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. After the events of February 24, 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, our country gained significant international attention. Ukraine, and at the same time, I really would like to tell a little more about Ukraine. Yes, how you can see on this map, Ukraine is a European nation, is situated at the cross borders of Europe, sharing borders with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, Belarus, and facing complex relations with Russia to the east. Ukraine also has a coastline along the Black Sea. Please, next slide. A couple of key points about Ukraine. So Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, with a diverse population. While the official language is Ukrainian, the country is known for its language tolerance, and Russian is widely spoken due to historical ties. Actually, my native language is Russian first, and Ukrainian is my second native language. The government operates under semi-presidential republic with a constitution, and Ukraine has been independent from the Soviet Union for over 30 years. It's very important to understand, like some context background about Ukraine. And please, next slide. On the next slide, it's a key important facts about Ukrainian society that really provide, information how we move forward for so real great transparency, accountability, and actually right now we're one of the best countries around the world, around the Europe, if we talk about transparency in Ukraine. So it's a key important fact. First of all, it's really Ukraine society values education with high percentage of highly educated individuals. It has a strong civil society with a history of successful pro-democracy movements such as Orange Revolution and Euromaidan. This movement shaped the country's commitment to freedom, democracy, and transparency. In fact, right now we have this like transparency in Ukraine because really strong civil society, and my organization involved one of this organization. So, and just a couple of words what we are doing on transparency right now. Please move the next slide. How I mentioned, we represented Anti-Corruption Research and Education Center, and we work with the civil education, academic research and public policy, anti-corruption education. And in fact, access to public information and a part of our expertise and whistleblower protection as a very important guarantee is also one of our focus. We do this through education, through the research, through drafting law, and some advocacy, what we do. Please, next slide. Here it's like a couple advertisement. I mean, it's what we do during like even during the war. We really help the National Anti-Corruption Prevention Agency to develop expert whistleblower protection, drafting law on classified information, etc. This next slide is just like advertisement of our center. Yeah, it's also what we do. And the next slide. And also what we do with cooperation with our organization and institutions. Thank you. It's one moment for advertisement. So and how you saw, like my organization is do so much, and actually we have really hundreds such organizations like mine. They do really job on government transparency and accountability in Ukraine. And that is why we have this kind of level of transparency. But right now, I would like to talk a little bit about history, how we start in Ukraine. Please, next slide. During the Soviet Union, there was no any government transparency and accountability, and only state propaganda existed. So when Ukraine gained independence, we needed to change this approach. The first step in this journey occurred in 1992, like you see, when the law on information was adopted. It marked a positive shift as it allowed people to request ecological and environmental information that would not be classified. However, there was still many declaration and exemption reflected and compromise between our totalitarian past and our democratic future at that time. In 1996, our constitution was adopted, and there were some very important provisions that created a base for access to public information at that time. But real, situation changed, dramatically changed 2011. But actually, it was not in one night. It took from 2004 until 2011 to really good, robust, strong provisions to get access to freedom to information. I mean, information that government hold. And it happens because a key driver behind that transformation was a coalition of organizations, included human rights protection groups, Legal Political Reform Institute, Media Law Institute, and some other, non-profit organizations, Ukrainian, who created coalition and really first draft and after that advocate that law. And I was one of that people. That time I was a member of Human Rights Protection Group, an expert who really did that job. And in 2011, we got this is really great law. And that is, before Revolution of Dignity, its implementation of this law faced challenged, especially during the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych. It was one of dictator in Ukraine right now. He escaped to Russia. And really between 2011 and 2014, it was not real implementation. However, after the Revolution of Dignity, Euromaidan, how I mentioned before, the law became a crucial foundation for transparency in our country. Until the Russian invasion in 2022, it served as a cornerstone of open data initiatives, such as the Prozora Asset Declaration Portal and open databases. Today, my colleagues will talk more about all these initiatives, actually, but really the key issue was this is law on access to public information. It was like a base, like a constitution for United States, and it was really crucial important. And from 2014 to 2022, really we got this all great initiative with open databases, open data, Prozora. But after the Russian invasion, really we got a challenge, and some of databases were closed. I believe my colleagues will talk more about this, but thankful to civil society, and it was reasonable 2022, when it was started. But thank you, civil society efforts led to gradual restoration of the pre-war open database, including the Prozora in some way, right now is discussion about access declaration online portal. So step by step, we come back to openness that existed before war started. This is big war. But we'll see, and what we expect 2024, we expect new classified information laws that really going to meet with NATO standards and reach a good balance between national security and the right to know, as well transparent platform DREAM and crucial amendments to access to public information law itself aimed to increase transparency even more in Ukraine. So, and if I have a couple of minutes, just a couple of words about, the law on access to public information and compare with the United States experience. This next slide. This was like timeline. So first of all, what I would like to tell you, when our law was adopted, and according to evaluation international expert, our law it ranked among the top 10 laws in the world. This recognition was based on the robust provisions in content ensuring the right to access information, government commitment, proactive disclosure, equal access for all citizens, short response deadlines, the role of ombudsman, restriction on classified information, etc. So our law considered one of the best in the world. And I would like to tell you why. Please, next slide. Little bit more, because we really created a great tool to comply if you don't get access to information from government. It's Ombudsman Plus. What does it mean? Ombudsman Plus means that ombudsman the representative from parliament who fights for human rights. He has a special special team and tools together with civil society organizations to push government to provide information. And ombudsman orders are it's like mandatory for any agency in Ukraine, and it's really a very important mechanism to guarantee access to public information. Secondly, it's a rule that we don't have any fee for information, just for to make hard copies. Also, it's very limited exemptions for information access. And some other key points I'm going to tell more when you ask me, because really I run out of time. So, and just a couple of words to compare with United States legislation. By the way, how I mentioned, the success of Ukrainian transparency initiatives on much of civil society, international cooperation, and robust legal framework. But what is very important, that we all time use US experience when we draft law, because like freedom of information in United States, we consider like, please, previous slide, we consider like a real success story and one of the first and modern history of story, transparency and government accountability. So our law is pretty similar with the Freedom of Information Act, but there are some differences. First of all, we have like, according to our law, government has only 5 business days to provide information. If not, if they need more time, they need to provide very serious explanation why they need more time, why they need 20 business days. In the United States, it's average, according to the law, it's 20 business days. Also, we have shorter term, but it's like, like special situation when the government should answer for during 24 hours. We don't, how I mentioned before, we don't have any fee, just for hard copy. And even those 10 pages, it's for free. And last but not least, the difference between US FOIA and our law, that we have one law for all records. Our law covered all borders, all branch, even, including the courts, regional, local councils and its bodies, and even personal records. In the United States, because it's a federation, this is law only for federal agency, and it does not cover like documents that held by Congress, courts, local government, and not include like personal records. So that is like some crucial difference that we have between FOIA and Ukraine. When I was in Ukraine, when I was a Fulbrighter here in the United States, 2013, 2014, that time really Ukraine had a great law, but without any implementation. Right now, I can say that we really implement all our provisions, and we really got serious progress and transparency and accountability in Ukraine. And that is why right now, when you see so many like corruption scandals, that is not because we got more corruption. Corruption level decrease, but government transparency, accountability show this. So government transparency, accountability, it's first very important step to overcome corruption. And Ukraine really made the step, and here I stop, and my colleagues will share like more details what we really did with this implementation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Oksana. I'll use my prerogative as host to ask one question, then we'll turn it over to Rob. So Oksana, can you tell us, because it's so fascinating, of all of the provisions that, frankly, as a frequently request are some of the provisions in Ukrainian law I'm a little jealous of. But can you tell us, what was it like drafting that law in 2012? Was it collaboration between civil society and Congress people? How did that strong law actually get written?
Okay, yeah. So, you know, it was actually a very complicated process, and it started honestly 2004 when Human Rights Protection Group created first draft law. And at the same time, another organization, when I mentioned like Political Legal Reform Institute, they created their own draft law. And it became first, you know, like that organization, Human Rights Protection Group, tried to convince Ukrainian government. And it was like, you know, some communication, informal communication with some officials, and try to convince them that it's very important to update this old law on information. And honestly, it was like some, you know, some competition between civil society organization and 2008 actually USAID, you know, got the project and said, guys, look, you know, you have like not good government. And you know, if you're going to have competition between you never get any law in Ukraine. So what you need to do, you need to do coalition. And you know, we very happy to help to you to build this coalition. What actually USA did, they just organized a couple of meetings between Ukrainian civil society organizations and say, guys, look, we provide all sources. Just please be in this room, finalize this draft law, make like agreement about that you advocate together, and just do it, So, and it was very important step that we was in the room. And actually, you know, if you talk about provisions, how we got this very important provisions, I believe in actually because Human Rights Protection Group I did together with our colleagues this research. It was 3 years monitoring. We understood what work and what does not work in Ukraine. I mean, if we talk about freedom of information, what is the problem? Provisions, or you know, like legal culture or something like this. And in fact, this is research helped a lot to do very good draft law. But you know, from other organizations, we got their experience, and it also helped so much. And we together, I mean, because this cooperation, we really did a good draft law. But after that, it was about advocacy. And our, you know, what we did, because, you know, it's very important to know, when this law was adopted, actually Yanukovych got power. So the question is how we did it. And actually, no, all good provisions was included to this draft law because Yanukovych. But anyway, we had a deputy, Andriy Shevchenko. He really was a great guy. After that, he became like the ambassador in Canada. So he was our, you know, like a good guy in parliament who actually promote this draft law between like deputies, even between like pro-Russian parliament representatives, because that time Yanukovych was not sure what he wanted to do, or go to European Union, or have a connection with Russia. And finally, Andriy Shevchenko explained to him, look, if you don't going to adopt this law, it's one of the requirements from the European Union. So you need to adopt this law. Actually, this is a whole story about Ukraine any reform and access to information as well. What we do? Strong civil society organization created a good product. Maybe the question is, who are these people, civil society, you know, organization? Actually, there are people like academics, lawyers, who wouldn't like, or legal advisors, or political scientists, who wouldn't like to be a part of formal system, but who would like to do difference. You know, for instance, like government accountability project did in the United States with whistleblower protection like years ago, you know. And this is people meet in some organizations and do this research, real research. For instance, For me, this is slow. It was the implementation my dissertation, because I wrote this in my dissertation on access to public information. It was my first step. So, and I mean, and this is how we created this law. And after that, what we do all time, we blackmail our government. Say, okay, guys, if you're not going to adopt, we're going to, complain to European Union institutions, to Euro institutions. And that is how it works, unfortunately. It's still here, and I know my colleagues will tell maybe the same about other initiatives, but yes, in this way.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you. So we all know, everyone here knows that access to open government transparency laws aren't just for historians like me to get old, crumbly documents. They actually can be used to fight corruption and make everyone's day-to-day lives better. And that's what Rob's going to speak about now. So I'll turn it over to him. I would remind the audience to start right now thinking of questions and send them in for both Oksana and Rob to ask after Rob completes his presentation. So take it away, Rob. Thanks.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can get the screen up. Can you see my screen, or is Claire? Can you see it? No. Is that good?
Yeah, right now, yeah, we see.
Okay, great. So let me start the show, and then we can go forward from there. So thank you, Nate, and thanks to ASAP for organizing today's event. I'm delighted to be on a panel with Oksana. It's just a real pleasure. My name is Rob O'Donovan. I'm the Vice President of Programs for Eurasia Foundation. Eurasia Foundation is based in Washington, D.C., and our programs focus primarily on e-governance, civil society strengthening, and youth leadership exchanges. But today I'd like to focus on how Russia's full-scale invasion has impacted Ukraine's public procurement reform, a lot of which is underwritten by the open data that Oksana was referring to earlier. So I'll just go to the next. So before I jump into it, though, I'd like to just offer a couple moments of kind of background information on Eurasia Foundation's involvement with public procurement reform in Ukraine. EF has supported Ukraine's public procurement reform for more than 7 years through the Transparency and Accountability in Public Administration and Services program. The full title of the program is painfully wordy, so I'll just use TAPAS for short. But I assure you, we're not selling small plates of Spanish food. The aim of TAPAS is to implement visible and successful reforms in public administration and services to reduce or eliminate corruption. We focus on 3 areas: e-procurement, promoting open data, and transforming paper-based administrative services into e-services. And as I mentioned, today I'll be focusing on the impact of the war on Ukraine's e-procurement reform. Just 2 more words though about TAPAS. Just again for kind of background information and a little bit of framing. These are some quick data points about the project. It's an 8-year program with funding from USAID Ukraine and UK International Development, or UK Aid. The split between these 2 donors is about 2/3 USAID and 1/3 UK Aid. Importantly, our main government partners in Ukraine are the Ministry of Economy and state-owned enterprise Prozoro, which is responsible for the Prozoro platform, and the Ministry of Digital Transformation. So what's Prozoro? It's kind of important to answer that question in order to talk about e-procurement reform in Ukraine. Prozoro, the word, is a play on the Ukrainian word for transparency. And Prozoro is an electronic procurement system that features automated reverse auctions, to kind of sum it up in a sentence. And I want to explain a little bit about how it works. To bid on a government contract in Ukraine, prospective suppliers take part in 3 rounds of anonymous bidding. Each supplier sees what their unnamed competitors are offering, and they lower their bids through these 3 rounds of bidding as far as they can afford as they compete on price. Beginning in 2016, the use of the Prozoro e-procurement system was mandated by law for all government buyers. And I'd like to highlight 2 aspects of the system. First, information about each tender that's announced through the Prozoro system is structured using the internationally recognized open contracting data standard, which facilitates easy analysis and comparison between government tenders. And second, when the auction is complete, all of the information about a public tender, including all of the offers, names of the competitors, and the winning bid, is available through an open API. And so what the Prozoro team tries to focus on is the mantra that they will repeat whenever given the moment, given the opportunity, which is that everyone sees everything. And this is really how they approach what was a historically deeply corrupt area, and namely public procurement. So what are some of the kind of key results? And this is tied to where Prozoro stood before the war. The beta version of Prozoro was launched in February 2015 and became the official platform, the legally mandated platform for public procurements in 2016. Since then, over 9 million public procurement procedures with a total value of more than $164 billion have been administered through Prozoro. The estimated savings to the budget of Ukraine through the use of Prozoro exceed $7 billion. How were these savings achieved? Before the Prozoro system was adopted and introduced, the anticipated price for a government contract almost always matched the winning bid. But once Prozoro was introduced and those 3 rounds of automated competition were introduced into the public procurement process, the winning contract price on average dropped between 7 and 10%, depending on the year. And the savings that result from that are the result of 2 factors. First, increased competition. In other words, there are simply more bidders competing and entering into the market and into the competition. And there's more transparent competition, where it is more difficult to steer a contract to a preferred bidder because everyone can see everything. With greater transparency comes the increased likelihood that corrupt tenders will be discovered and highlighted in the media or brought to the attention of government regulators. And importantly, and this is the last point here on the slide, the Prozoro system enables a robust oversight by anti-corruption watchdogs and government oversight agencies by making reliable tender information easily accessible through that open API that I mentioned earlier. So what happened? As you all know, Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. And on October 17th of this year, Ukraine marked the 600th day since Russia invaded. I don't want to go into the flow of the conflict, in any detail, but as a quick aside, I'm an international development professional. When we talk about the 3 Ds of defense, diplomacy, and development, I'm definitely the 3rd D in development. But I have learned a lot about weapon systems over the last 20 months when it comes to Javelins or HIMARS, Patriot surface-to-air missile systems, ATACMS, or the relative advantages of Leopard, Challenger, or Abrams tanks. I can offer more details than I ever thought I would never need to. But coming back to e-procurement, in the immediate aftermath of the invasion, the government quickly passed a decree on February 28th, 2022, that suspended the mandatory use of the Prozoro e-procurement system. Government buyers were asked to directly contract suppliers and not conduct competitive procurements through the Prozoro platform. The idea, of course, was to speed up the procurement process, purchase goods and services quickly to meet wartime needs and rapidly inject public funds into the wartime economy. However, once contracts are signed, public purchasers are still required to upload agreements onto the Prozoro platform, but complete documentation about the tender process that I described earlier is no longer available. So what's been the impact of suspending the mandatory use of Prozoro? While, of course, the decision to suspend the use of Prozoro was understandable, there have been several impacts resulting from that decision. First, it undermined the business model of state-owned enterprise Prozoro, which is the institutional home of the Prozoro platform. State-owned enterprise Prozoro generates revenue to sustain its operations and enhance the platform and the way that it functions by collecting a small fee, less than 1%, of each contract awarded through the system. Its revenue stream was, of course, disrupted by the government's decision to allow public buyers to directly contract vendors, and it posed a potential threat to this post-Maidan reform. In response, the Ministry of Economy and state-owned enterprise Prozoro began urging public buyers who are purchasing standard goods to use a part of the platform called Prozoro Market. As a bit of background, Prozoro Market is a platform, part of the platform for easy, fast purchases of standard goods like furniture, stationery, medical supplies, and others. The experience of using Prozoro Market is akin to Amazon. Browse, click, buy, rather than a lengthy, process of organizing, or lengthier process of organizing a competitive tender. But this Amazon style approach for Prozoro Market is just, of course, for public sector buyers in Ukraine. There are limitations, though, to Prozoro Market, and so its impact, has been a bit limited. More complicated procurements, like the purchase of vehicles, advanced medical equipment, or reconstruction services, can't be acquired through Prozoro Market. It's really just for kind of standard goods. And finally, and not surprisingly, there have been several scandals involving these direct contracts that were allowed after the February decree. For example, there was a scandal earlier this year that involved the Ministry of Defense purchases of eggs, potatoes, and other foodstuffs for the military. Investigative reporters and anti-corruption activists discovered that the ministry was directly contracting food suppliers, 8 of them, and paid more than 2 or sometimes 3 times the market price when purchasing foodstuffs for the military. In the wake of the scandal, the ministry's procurement chief as well as the deputy minister were dismissed earlier this year. And last month, President Zelensky replaced the defense minister. The defense minister himself wasn't implicated, but his inability to stamp out corrupt procurement practices at the ministry really played a big part in his ouster. So, however, there's already been as a return to more broad use of the Prozoro platform. In recognition of the risks of direct contracting, the corruption risks of direct contracting, the government of Ukraine adopted a decree in October 22 that prioritized competitive bidding through Prozoro as the preferred approach for public procurement. So not the legally mandated, but the preferred approach. So direct contracting remained an option, but today, as the emphasis on the preferred approach has, returned to the practices of government buyers, today about 70% of Ukraine's public procurement contracts are either competitively bid out through Prozoro or purchases are made through Prozoro market. So, of course, one of the key questions looking forward is recovery and reconstruction of a very war-torn and damaged Ukraine. The scale of destruction from the war has been enormous, and the recovery and reconstruction efforts will require massive public procurements. In June 2023, the Kiev School of Economics estimated the infrastructure damage across all sectors in Ukraine at about $150 billion. So there's clearly an urgent need for an efficient and transparent public procurement ecosystem, including the return as soon as practicable for the mandatory use of Prozoro. It will be essential for efficient resource allocation as the recovery and reconstruction begins, and it will be, of course, critical for maintaining the trust of international donors, investors, and the public in Ukraine. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be more than happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Rob. Again, I'm going to use my prerogative and ask you one on the tip of my mind, and then I believe our board member, Martha Murphy, will convey the questions that people have asked in the chat for both of our great hosts. So I know I just want to underline this. Since 2016, use of Prozoro system has saved the state budget more than $7.1 billion. That is a remarkable, measurable benefit of transparency, and that's really something. Can you just go a little bit more into tell us some ways that this has been saved? I think we all know the gist of it, but I just don't want to let that stat go. Measurable stat, 7.1 billion saved due to transparency since 2016. Tell us a little bit more about those savings.
Sure. So it's been 7 years since the use of Prozoro has been legally mandated, or from when that started in 2016. And the savings really comes from contract after contract after contract that go through the system, as I said before the system was established, when a government contract is released, there's an estimated price of that contract, right? And almost always the final contract price was the same as the announced one, and so there was an understanding that there were two things at play. One, competition wasn't going to be very strong. And two, that there was some element of potentially of a corruption tax that was included in that contract price, and that it would be the contract would be awarded, and then that corruption tax would be come back in the form of a kickback or some other corrupt practice. And so the understanding is that by seeing a reduction in in the difference between the announced contract price and that 7 to 10% drop on the actual final awarded contract price, that's how the savings is measured. And they just tally it up, contract after contract after contract that's tendered out through the system. And the key piece, of course, is to try to return as much of the public procurement process, to the Prosoro, to have it managed through the Prosoro system, because then it's really, it will be something where folks will be able to take a look at, how did the tender go? When it's of course absolutely understandable in wartime, direct contracting is what everyone, what international best practice would recommend. But we're now beyond the initial phase, and we need to be mindful of corruption, especially as there's going to be a massive inflow of money to support Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction.
Thanks, Rob. The power of open government. Absolutely fascinating. Again, thanks to both of our presenters. And I'm going to, I think Martha will read out some questions from our audience for you guys.
I am just going to take it from the top. For Oksana, what are the challenges your organization has faced in your efforts to maintain transparency and anti-corruption, and how have you been able to overcome those challenges?
Thank you for your question. May I ask you, do you ask me about my current experience or about where we was fighting for law on access to public information?
So she's not specific, but I would say current experience.
Okay. Maybe sources. I mean, all time you need to have a people who have enough expertise, time to do job. And in fact, when we talk about, to advocate some good reform and anti-corruption reform, like and particularly in transparency, you need to have people who have a knowledge and will to do it. And it's not about, only activism. It's also about professionalism and maybe, lack of human sources that could be connected with financial sources would be a challenge. I mean, we all time overcome it, and we all time like fighting for these sources, but yes, it could be a challenge. And actually, my organization done research. There is actually in English. You can go on anti-corruption, ACREC.org.ua site, and there is in English also version research. The role of local anti-corruption organization in anti-corruption reform in Ukraine. It was like research we conducted from 2017 and 18 until 2020. It was a really big research. We had more than 400 interviews and around the Ukraine, and it's like all-time dilemma for small organization in regional level, first of all, to have enough sources to do real sustainable activities to get results.
Thank you. We have some questions about the role of the ombudsman. If a requester is unhappy with the ATPI law, do they appeal immediately to the ombudsman, or is there an internal appeal authority before you go to the ombudsman?
It's not requirement. I mean, it's actually also one good thing about Ukrainian law if compared with some European laws. It's up to person. Person can go to the, first to apply for higher level agency, yes, who provide some control, or go directly to ombudsman. I mean, it's up to person. One only like requirement, if person make a complaint to ombudsman, I mean, she or he cannot go to the court. I mean, she cannot go to the court, but it means if ombudsman will learn that it's a case in the court, ombudsman can do nothing. Why? Because the court is the last institution that make final decision. So what we really recommend, I mean, if you go to ombudsman, not to go to the court. If you go to the court, not apply to ombudsman, because you cannot do both together.
Thank you. But the ombudsman can order records to be released,
Yes.
and they are an authority to do that.
Yes. Moreover, if authority does not follow its recommendation, ombudsman may order to punish agency, certain officials, and that is very important, too. I mean, if authority, say, because it's very common for Ukraine, okay, I have order from ombudsman, why I should do this? Okay, if you don't do this, I'm going to make another order to punish you. And it's a real responsibility for real officials.
Thank you. For Rob, how big of a challenge was it to get Prozoro established? It's kind of a general question, but maybe what were the biggest challenges?
Sure. So just a bit about the origin story of Prozoro. In 2014, 2013-14, the Maidan revolution took place, the revolution of dignity, and there was a group of NGOs, NGO activists that came together to work with the Ministry of Economy to create the pilot platform, or the beta version of the Prozoro platform. It included folks from Transparency International Ukraine and others, and they actually incubated the system on servers that they controlled and owned. And then at some point, once the beta had run and demonstrated that it was effective, it was then all of the intellectual property was then transferred to the Ministry of Economy and state-owned enterprise Prozoro. It was a challenge, I think, to create it, but there was also political leadership at the Ministry of Economy at that time to see it come together, and technical know-how and capability in the civil society sector, and then also some international experts have been supported by the EBRD and others to come and provide kind of technical guidance on setting up such a system. And so it was, when we came on the scene in 2016, there was already a beta that had been announced, and then it was a question of continuing to invest in the technical capability, technological capability of the site and the platform, and also to defend it in the with support for legal reform and that kind of those kinds of interventions. And so it's really about developing an ecosystem around procurement reform that uses the open data that Oksana's law helps to ensure is available. And so this is really about the application of open data and easily accessed information.
That's great. We have some very specific questions. One was, how long do the bidders have between the bids and the three rounds of bidding?
It takes about an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's quick. In other words, everyone who submits their initial bid is invited at a particular appointed time to take part in this reverse auction. And that was actually one of the problems that led to the decision to adopt direct contracting. As you may remember from news reports, the Russian military was attacking electrical infrastructure, and several companies complained with good reason that they at the appointed hour when they were supposed to compete, they didn't have electricity because the transformer station had just been bombed or whatever, and so it really that was part of the argument as well for shifting to direct contracting. And so, but it doesn't take long. And it's, as soon as you submit your initial bid, then you're invited to take part, and then you go through this multiple rounds of reverse auction.
And is the fee that's paid, is it paid by the winning bidder, or is it a percentage of the award amount? How does that work?
Yeah, it's paid by the winning bidder. And so there's it's a fee that is charged for the use of the Prozoro system, and it's just part of the like it's a state mandated fee for facilitating the auction, but it's minimal. I mean, it's less than 1%, but it is a source of an important source of revenue for state-owned enterprise Prozoro.
And one more sort of detailed question like that: does the government still estimate the contract cost? And is there a system to ensure that the estimates are not inflated to overstate the perceived savings?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks to the use of the system.
Yeah, definitely. It's as they've gotten, yes, they still estimate the cost. You need to give bidders some sense of like, okay, here's the scope that's being proposed, for the purchase of goods or the provision of services, and so and this is what the government is willing to pay, or what we estimate is the cost, and so yeah, there is. There's always the concern about, is this being rigged? And so there is a process by which there's a review of pricing over several months of issuing similar kinds of bids. And that's also part of the way that civil society activists can take a look at particular bids and say, whoa, for the purchase of, let's say, 200 computers for in this school district, it seems like the price is much higher. The estimated price is much higher in this school district versus the other 7 neighboring districts. Why? And so that there's because of the approach of everyone sees everything, there's both regulatory scrutiny that's enabled, but then importantly, watchdog, civil society watchdog assessments that can be made and that are enabled by having access to that information.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you so much. I'm going to give you a break and go back to Oksana a little. Someone asked if there's still a legal process of appeals like in the United States. So from what I heard from you, you can still sue. So I guess my question is, how many of the disputes are resolved by the ombudsman and how many actually sort of become a lawsuit? And if you don't like the ombudsman's response, can you still sue?
Yeah, I start from the last point. Yes, I mean, if you don't like, if you apply to ombudsman and you got like nothing, yes, you can, after that, you can sue. Anyway, and if you talk about, what is actually benefits if you apply to ombudsman, if you compare with you, it's it's for free, yes. And really, what the challenge we have in Ukraine with the, when we go to the court, that you need to pay. It's not big money. Compare with with United States. It's like less than $100. But anyway, for Ukraine, and it's a big money anyway. And for instance, first of all, if you are civil society organization and you really, you do it's like all time some requests, information requests for monitoring, like this is level of transparency, etc. It seems like a big money. If we talk about what is the percent, I mean, you know, honestly, here, okay, I would like to be honest. With the court, we have a lot of challenge, and with information as well. I know I just would like to provide, you know, some certain case. It was like around 5 years ago, it was a big scandal about building the, like, you know, in the United States, you build a wall between Mexico and United States. In Ukraine, we was building like, oh yeah, Rob knows the story, between Russia and Ukraine. And some activists made decision to ask documentation like financial audit, how much they paid. And the answer was, you know, like, we cannot provide all these documents, all records, because it's some national security issue. So they applied to the court, and they won. I mean, the court said, yes, it's violation of access to public information. The agency, the Minister of Defense, should provide information for you. But at the same time, in this decision, they say, look, it's violation of your right. And they don't say directly that Minister of Defense should provide this information. They say in another way. The Minister of Defense should reconsider your request. You know, reconsider, like, I mean, like, again, check if they can give you information or not. And come on, guys, you seriously, we pay money, we go through this whole process. You say that it's, yes, it's violation on the law on access to public information, particularly the provision, like second part of 6th article of access to public information. But at the same time, we say, not, guys, it's mandatory to provide the information. Reconsider, please, request of this organization. And we thought that it's just one case, but after that, some organizations did like monitoring, and we found that actually there are like 100 decisions like this when courts say, yes, it was violation, and agencies should reconsider. In these circumstances, ombudsman can be more, you know, can provide better results, because ombudsman case by case fight exactly to help you to get this information. That is point. The problem with ombudsman, when people understood that ombudsman actually it's a very good, you know, tool to get information, ombudsman got huge kind of, you know, like cases from citizens. And it's again about human sources. I mean, that ombudsman just does not have enough human sources to take each case and, you know, from beginning to end, or help the people to get this information. And, you know, right now, ombudsman change. It's also, honestly, it's also about the people. And right now, ombudsman does not consider like a real good, like last ombudsman, you know, that was appointed after war started, like a good helper to get information. And right now, I mean, it's very difficult to say. Actually, right now, one of our organization is running research. We are going to have a result, like I believe, like in a couple of months more, and to see this information, who is better right now, ombudsman or court. But it depends on case. But if we talk about money, it's better to apply to ombudsman. If we talk about result, it really depends. But I mean, like with previous ombudsman, definitely ombudsman help more than court decision.
That's really fascinating. Thank you. We have a couple more questions just about how the public access law works. In the United States, individual requesters seeking information on themselves actually outnumbers journalists and civil society groups looking for information that's more to do with government accountability. Is the same true in Ukraine, or is that a unique culture in the United States and the way we're working?
I'm sorry, could you just little bit just paraphrase? I mean, to be sure that I get your point. I see my colleagues.
Sure. So a lot of the FOIA is actually a greater number of Freedom of Information Act requests are things like individuals asking for their own records, like their immigration file, or their veterans' medical records, or their social security information. Those actually outnumber the requests that we get, that sort of we've been talking about today, where civil society groups or journalists are really looking into government accountability. And it's been a challenge in the United States because they sort of are overwhelming the system a little bit. So I'm just wondering if that's a similar situation.
You mean when civil organization asks some records about some other people, like archive information, you mean? Or it's
it's just the sheer number of requests coming in where people are asking for their own information. So I'm asking for my file, my immigration file. And the sheer number of those types of requests make it difficult for agencies to address the more substantial.
Okay, I got your point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have like certain like dates, but I cannot say that it's actually, that is if like people like ask like information, personal records, it affect like civil groups or journalists to get like other information. We have some another issue, but also I believe it's some little speculation from local governments. Local governments would like to say, some activists like do 100 requests, and we can with the same question, and we just provide information. They ask you again and again. So guys, you need to put some restrictions that people should not, use that rights to block activity of local, local government, like local agency. But from my point of view, yes, sometimes it's happened, but usually civil groups ask information that they are really. Yeah, I mean, like we don't have like this kind of like challenge like the United States, but we have another challenge when like some people just would like to do like 100 requests to.
That's a challenge here as well. Yes, a similar challenge. One other question, just sort of a technical question about the access law. To make a proper request, how do people do it? Does it have to be in writing? Can it be over the phone? And are there certain types of records or information that are deemed confidential and are not typically released?
Actually, you can use any, like anyway, like according to the law, you can mail, you can do email. I mean, like by email. You can do this by phone. You can do by the fax. You can address like oral requests just to come and ask. And we even put like and etc. Because maybe technology going to create like more ways. And right now we consider, and actually we say this and during our like training sessions, look, if some governments says that my page in social media is like official page, for instance, like Ministry of Defense has official page on Facebook because it's very popular in Ukraine, or like a Telegram, or like something like other, like, communication channels with public, and they say it's my official. And if they have the chat and chat is open, if you ask something by this chat, it's also like official request and access to public information covered. Yeah, I know it sounds
cool.
like fantastic, but it's true. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. Rob, I'm going to just go back to you for a sec.
Sure.
Someone asked how Prozoro is protected from Russian or other hacking and disinformation or overloading.
Yeah, so the we've actually invested quite a lot in the cybersecurity of the platform, and the one part of that is ensuring that Ukraine's public procurement data is stored securely. It was funny. We began when we began providing support to state-owned enterprise Prozoro. The beta had been created using Amazon Web Services as the place where the public procurement data was being stored. And so, according to Ukrainian law, like many other European countries, the data needs to be stored. If it's public data, in other words, data that's being generated, by the government, needs to be stored on servers on the territory of Ukraine. And so we had to, bring the data back. And so it was, while not losing a beat with regard to the functioning of the platform. And so there are of course data farms that are located on the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine is famous for as a source of IT expertise, and so there are data farms there, and so we transferred all of that information from Amazon Web Services to a company called Denovo, which is based in Kyiv. Fast forward to February of 22, and suddenly that's a real vulnerability. And so the legislation was adjusted to allow a split approach. And so after we brought all of the data to the territory of Ukraine, then we provided support to state-owned enterprise Prozoro so that they could then save backup copies of all of the information, kind of live backups of this data in servers that are located outside of Ukraine and protected from the potential missile strikes or other military actions of the Russian government. And then, of course, when the data is saved on AWS, then it becomes or some other a third-party vendor that's outside of Ukraine, then all of the cybersecurity systems that provider utilizes are brought to bear. And we've also helped strengthen how the data is managed inside Ukraine as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oksana, I have a question for you. In the United States, a non-US citizen can file a Freedom of Information Act request, so a Ukrainian citizen can legally ask for US federal records. Can a United States citizen, or a Russian for that matter, ask for Ukrainian records?
Yes, actually, when we talk, yes, I mean, this is law, I mean, how I say, not any discrimination, if we can say in this way, like everyone that consider like any person, yeah, or like legal entity can make request. And it does not matter, it's not connected with the citizenship. It would be like people who don't have any citizenship or have or who are foreigners. The point is, when we talk about government transparency, accountability, and then what is the logic? I mean, if it's information is not sensitive, it's information about government activity, people have right to know, and it does not matter who is. If it's like sensitive information and it's really need to be classified, through like going this public interest test, yes, it's a classified, and like nobody, like including like some bad people like enemy, can get this information. That is point. Yes, like everyone means everyone. It does not matter you are Ukrainian or you're like from Russia or if you're United States or like from Canada or any other countries. Sorry.
Thank you. One person put in this question, so our defense and our intelligence agencies are often very protective of their information. So I'm going to expand it a little bit. Have you found that some agencies are more protective than others? And has that been a challenge?
In Ukraine, yes, it's from here. You know, when we conducted monitoring, it was pretty much time ago, we found that actually national security agency, particularly like SBU in Ukraine, was more open, transparent than some financial institution where were a lot of money. And that is time we understood, like first understood that actually, you know, if government would like, certain agency would like to hide something, it's more not about national security, it's more about corruption. It was so interesting, you know, to consider that some local agency, I mean, or like, you know, local like self-government wouldn't like provide some information, explain that some national security, etc., while like some like national security service can provide. I mean, definitely right now the situation dramatically changed because we have a war, and it's like it's an international standard. It's all time, you know, balance between national security and right to know, but at the same time freedom of information. But at the same time, what I see in Ukraine, when some government, if you ask something really, you know, that connected to money, and it could be high risk corruption, you can be sure that you don't get like information. If we talk about, you know, because right now I mentioned we are drafting right now we have a law on state secrets. It's a pretty, you know, Soviet Union approach. Definitely we change that law according to the law on access to public information, and there are some mention to, you know, like to access to public information. But at the same time, right now, and I'm also a part of this member group, working group who are working on this draft law on classified information. And definitely before the war, right now, not we like lost like this communication with government. But before the law, we met frequently in the committee of the Parliament of Ukraine, and we talked to, you know, to national security, etc. And I also found that people actually who have a deal with real and national security, they would like try to find, you know, balance. They all time think about balance, not violate national security, but also be transparent and accountable. But people who, you know, more involved some financial issues, they all time during the meeting groups try to, you know, try to push some provisions that could decrease access to public information. And I remember the situation when actually it's actually connected with the, you know, public procurement and the Minister of Defense, when the NAC organization, it's a very strong civil society organization that actually was a part of Transparency International of Ukraine before, right now it's an independent organization. They advocate the provision that some information, even it's about like connected to Minister of Defense, should not be classified, like some defense procurement, because it was necessary, you know, for competition in this defense market. And what we found that actually Parliament agreed to provide more transparency in this issue. But when law was adopted and signed, it was something strange, but the provision that should be declared that this information should be, certain information should be open, this information was classified according to that new provision. So I'm sorry for my English. The point is that it's totally, you know, when government would like to protect some corrupt guys, because the issue was to make more transparency in the defense procurement. to get more protection for national security, you know, because it's a competition for the for procurement in this market. It's very important. It was before the war, but when law was at, Parliament voted to open this information. But when law was signed, everyone found that a certain provision was moved to information that should be classified. It was a big scandal. But anyway, right now we're in the same situation, and we would like to move this provision in a new law on classified information, like open information. But we'll see. So unfortunately, in Ukraine, we still see that officials don't care so much about national security when they talk about the transparency, you know, but we see some really corrupt guys would like to close some information, not because national security, but to have possibility to, you know, to get some benefits for their companies, for their own. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're getting near the bottom of the hour. Thank everyone so much for all your excellent questions. I think we'll stop the Q&A there, if that makes sense, Nate.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of the great questions from our viewers. Thanks again to Oksana and Rob. We have about 2 minutes left, so I'd like to give Rob and then Oksana a chance to do a very short closing thought or closing remarks if you have any.
Right. I just wanted to highlight one point that Oksana had made earlier, and I think it's a truism about Ukraine, but for folks who are not familiar or maybe as familiar with Ukraine as others, it's the strength of civil society in Ukraine is remarkable. And as someone who has worked in Kazakhstan and in Georgia and in Azerbaijan, Armenia, Moldova, in comparison to all of the other post-Soviet countries, there's just a qualitatively different level of intellectual capability and capacity to affect change among civil society actors in Ukraine. It's really just a remarkable facet of what it means to be working in Ukraine, that you always will find a partner or an implementing organization with which to work on the civil society side. And just it's really something that as a message that has little to do with e-procurement or public access, but just to drive home that point, that civil society really functions as it ought to in a society in Ukraine, a real partner for and a counterpart and counterweight to government and the private sector. And so that's what I wanted to underline.
Completely agree, Rob. Oksana, we're at time, but if you have a few closing words, please.
I would like just say thank you to everyone. It was really a pleasure to participate in this great discussion, and thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it. Is that just like last point, when we talk about the freedom of information, it's all process, and it's all-time battle between government and society and civil society. And today and victory, it's like in American football, it's a fight, and we need to continue our fight to get more information from government. Like any government would like to, to keep some secrecy. Yeah, it's a process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks again to all of our attendees. Thanks to ASAP, thanks to Ryan, thanks to Claire. I'll turn it over to Claire.
I just want to say thank you to all of our attendees, and we'll be sending you a follow-up evaluation as well as the handouts. A couple of you have emailed us, excuse me, for the handouts, but we will also directly email them to you in case you weren't able to download them. And Rob and Oksana, thank you very much. And thanks to our President Ryan for his initiating this. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.